Where is this picture? Give you a hint, it's in Japan. It's a temple just beside the Tokyo Tower, you know, that red and white one. What's this got to do with social capital and the measurement of social capital? Well, as we'll find out in the rest of the lecture, attempts to measure social capital end up sort of being things like counting proportion of people who belong to particular organizations, or things like religious groups, counting how often people go to a meeting. It's counting and counting and counting. And I guess this is a Buddhist temple, excuse my ignorance, but it probably is. More temples, more social capital? I mean, I don't know. Or more people participating with these beliefs, more social capital. That's what runs through most of the social capital literature. And, well, you know, do I count these? Well, does that give me a measure of social capital? Well, quite clearly, well, I'm about to say quite clearly not. But look, individuals have come along, they've knitted a little cap for that, they've put these things that go around in the wind, I don't know what you call them. If there's only one, maybe it's just one individual that's shown any interest and come along, but there's loads of them. So maybe this is a measure of social capital and greater engagement. Well, I don't know. What we're going to get to is a series of questions at the end. Partly, what is social capital? How can we measure it? And can we measure it reliably or robustly? But yeah, I have to say that, of course, I took this photo before I knew, I'm not psychic, before I knew I was coming to give a lecture on social capital. This was back in, 2 years ago. 2 years ago, okay. Right, lecture 2. Excuse me. So, what is social capital? This would seem a simple question, but it's far from straightforward to answer. It is not as simple as it appears. I've got a quote here from a statistician in England. Social capital can end up meaning all things to all people. And that might be going a bit too far, but it is a bit like that. It's almost anything can be described as social capital, as we'll find. UK formally follows a OECD definition, and that OECD definition focuses on networks together with shared norms, values, and understandings that facilitate cooperation within or among groups. Now, immediately you sense how general that is. Part of it, networks. Well, we can imagine what a network is, but a lot of networks are not particularly visible. They exist, but they're not visible. Shared norms, shared values, shared understandings. Well, that's really quite hard to measure. When is an understanding shared between people? How can you sense it's shared? I, as an outsider to Japan, have a sort of feeling that maybe in Japanese society there's particularly strong shared norms. Now this is all, I have to say, this is all based on having a Japanese wife. So it's not very good science. She's a very good wife, but it's not good science as a means of trying to make these generalizations. But that is my sense, that there's a very sort of strong sharing of norms, or much stronger than in, say, England, sharing of values and norms. There's various distinctions that are made, and I'll go through some of them. Sometimes the distinction is drawn between individual social capital and community social capital. So we'll look at that one. Another distinction that's sometimes made is between cognitive components of social capital and structural components. We'll look at that. And yet another one is between what's called bonding social capital and bridging social capital. Indeed, there's other forms. There's one called linking social capital, but I'm not going to go into that one. So I want to explore some of these different forms of social capital. Taking the individual and community one first of all, it's quite common for a distinction to be made. So individual social capital can be defined as the level of trust or group working or membership or cooperation that the individual has with the larger society. So it's focused on the individual and what is their relationship to the broader society. This can be distinguished from the community social capital, which is talking about the extent, the density of trust, of cooperation, of the various links and activities within a given population. So it's not looking at it from the individual's point of view, it's looking at the whole population, almost looking down on it and looking at the degree of activity. I don't know if it helps, but what comes to my mind is, have you ever seen these pictures or really graphics of flight paths of aircraft? And so if you had a map for Japan, there'd be a big thick line going into Narita. Possibly even thicker, depends how you measure it, by flights or passenger numbers, into Haneda. But then the line going into Itami would be a bit smaller, and so on. And that would be measuring the number of flights or maybe the number of passengers taking that route over time. And so that would be a bit like the community social capital. You're looking at the extent of travel into different airports. But for the individual, of course, we don't look at it that way. We think of our relationship to different places. So then for the individual, I suppose the counterpart would be that particular flight that on one occasion or every week they take from one airport to another. So I don't know if that helps, but that's the distinction from the individual point of view and the overall community point of view. Now, there is a question here. Can we estimate the extent of community social capital by looking at the data for individual social capital? Is the community social capital just the summation or aggregate of the individual social capital? And we'll come back to this, but part of me thinks, isn't there something there that's not just the individuals added together? There's a sort of, maybe it's a synergy, but there's something else created, and that's the community element.